I'm thinking about this idea of the sublime and how it might be a contributing element within this bigger idea of the sacred. So I'm trying to unpack the sublime, and what I'm thinking of here is in my last video I was talking about the sublime as it's used in romantic paintings, 19th century romantic paintings, and romantic poetry. That's quite interesting, I think. Well, there's something interesting there for me, because what's coming out for me there, or what's occurring to me as I'm talking and thinking about this, is that the sublime is a feeling you get from nature. That's the idea of it. You actually do visit the coastline, and you do look out, and there it is. There's this sublime, majestic panorama by which you are dwarfed in comparison, and you get this great overwhelming feeling of being kind of oceanic feeling, almost, not quite some kind of that feeling. But the fact that it also exists in art and in poetry and in music, it's a contributing factor in a lot of music as well, means that it is possible to represent it. Now that's pretty obvious in paintings, I guess. Some of the, I can't remember the bloody names of these paintings. I saw a big exhibition of paintings of the Sublime about 3 years ago, and I can't remember any of the people, unfortunately. It's just gone. But these paintings typically are fucking massive, you know what I mean? Typically, that would be the strategy you would use. You would get a 15-foot by 10-foot canvas and paint, just a huge scene on there, And then if you stand in front of it as an audience, if you like, or as a viewer, as a user of this artifact, the same feelings will be invoked in you as if you were there at the actual landscape, or as there. In fact, more so, possibly, because the painters had the opportunity to enhance these effects. There's more lightning, and there's more thunderclouds, and there's more crashing breakers, and there's a greater expanse of nothingness to look at, carefully framed nothingness. So you get the same feelings, in theory at least, standing in front of a painting which is informed by the idea of the sublime, as you would in nature. That's the aspiration. Slightly more complex in poetry. Certainly, if I can come back to poetry a sec, certainly, I guess it's possible to describe in language or in words, written words, it's possible to describe that effect. And there are, not the effect, but to describe the scene in such a way that it invokes that feeling. We're very good at that, I think. You conjure up the image in your mind. Someone describes, like in Wuthering Heights, where this blasted heath is being described. You do get that kind of feeling of the sublime almost in that. Or, let me think of another example. Well, even in the language of some scientists, Carl Sagan was fucking marvellous at that. The images which accompanied Cosmos, the documentary he did, were of that kind, but his linguistic expressions associated with that, his language, his talk, his writing around that, had a similar kind of effect. It has this kind of lyrical quality and this quality of description, which again brings those images in your mind. You don't see them in front of you like a big painting, but you kind of see the big painting in your head, and it's a painting of the cosmos, and it's really big, So, just things like Pale Blue Dot, he wrote that beautiful piece, Pale Blue Dot. When you hear that, even if you don't see any of the images associated with it, it gives you that kind of feeling of the sublime, I think. It's doing the same job, but it's doing it imaginatively. Somewhere probably in your conscious mind, but to a certain extent in your unconscious as well, those same images are being evoked. Images of immensity, images of that kind of majesty and authority and power and potential for threat, terror. The terror of nothingness, the terror of being swallowed up, the terror of being consumed, and the terror of being insignificant. All that kind of thing is captured in that, and the beauty of that, and the beyond beauty of terror. And poetry as well, I think. That's what I kind of want to get to with this. Poetry, in something like, Wordsworth's Prelude, I guess that would be an example. Spent a long time writing Prelude. Kept going back to it most of his life. And, there's parts of that which he doesn't really describe scenes of You know, there's not that Carl Sagan kind of evocative language describing a scene which, if you were in front of it, it would produce that feeling. But the way he uses the language, you know, his use of certain terms, even though he's not actually describing a big scene, his use of certain terms and the rhythms of his words, and even the sounds of his words, the kind of onomatopoeic effects of some of these words, has these I think it's called lacunae, spaces. It's sometimes said he creates spaces in his writing, and those spaces and times can be so large. I'm talking figuratively, of course. Those spaces can be so large, these imaginary spaces he's opening up in your conscious mind, in your unconscious probably as well, actually, more significantly, that the space he is creating through his kind of dexterous use of language makes you kind of do this in your unconscious. You know, these vast spaces open up, and in the same way that Pale Blue Dot evokes that sense of the sublime, even though you're not actually standing in front of a picture of the cosmos, so the tricks of Wordsworth language and other kinds of writing of that kind does the same thing. It does this. It makes these vast lacunae open up in your subconscious, and you get this feeling, all this feeling wells up, even though you're not thinking of it consciously. All your felt responses come out, and you get this feeling of the sublime. Oops, the dog's limping. You alright, pup? Yeah, I'll come back to this again, I think. There's something interesting there for me.